thing that I want to talk about is kind of like a travel demand modeling, calibration, validation, and update process that we did for BCAG up in Butte County. The second project that I wanted to talk about is a corridor travel analysis project that we did as part of the Placer Sacramento Gateway plan that we put together. And the third use case that we wanted to kind of highlight was really just some turning movement counts that we needed for a kind of a small land use project in the city of Manteca. So I first wanted to kind of talk about the BCAG model update. And really it's like where we were able to leverage StreetLight data was really to kind of take a look at the interregional travel trends. So kind of not just travel inside of Butte County, but also looking at those trips that kind of enter and leave Butte County as part of our model update process. We were also able to kind of take a look at specific trip generators that are kind of unique or special that really don't correspond to standard like ITE trip generation rate and are probably not as studied in details, but we can get that type of trip generation and distribution information using StreetLight data. We also ended up using StreetLight data as one of the data sources that we took a look at to come out with the model trip length adjustments for trips that basically pass in and out of the area covered by BCAG's travel demand model. So just really kind of quickly at what that looks like, that interregional travel, we specifically ran a StreetLight zonal activity analysis. So like a single zone analysis that gave us summary information on like the number of trips that kind of stayed within our zone and the number of trips that entered and left our zone. So that actually gives us our nice little internalization percentages that we can use to evaluate our models, to kind of calibrate and validate the travel demand model. So just like the graphic kind of here shows, it's just the gray boundary mark is actually the BCAG model boundary, and then we kind of have just evaluated the number of trips that enter and leave into the area. We were also able to use the Insight platform to draw zones around specific trip generators that are kind of like unique and special. So for this case, we ended up looking at the regional shopping mall, the regional focus shopping mall that's kind of just north of Orville. And then we also took a look at two of the different casinos that are in the area. And then we took a look at the Sierra Nevada like brewery, just to kind of get an idea that, you know, generally travel to and from these locations isn't necessarily inherently typical, and like we wanted to have special information to be able to account for that in the development of the regional model. And then the third thing that we used is actually we used the OD analysis that StreetLight provides with middle filters to evaluate all the travel kind of entering and exiting at the different gateway locations throughout the model. So these purple dots on the map. And that really is like a way for us to like capture an idea of the distribution as to where people are going to when they leave those locations. But also we use that information to kind of evaluate the trip links adjustments that we need to apply to the gateway locations. In this table here, we were able to kind of go through each of our gateway locations in the model and then look at the common like origins and destinations for trips that use that gateway, like outside of Butte County. And then we were able to also get a trip length estimate from StreetLight data for those. And basically with the current changes to the law regarding like CEQA analysis and trying to evaluate transportation impacts under CEQA for proposed projects or different like land use plans, the Governor's Office of Planning and Research in their guidelines basically clearly states that travel demand models and the VMT estimates that we're using to evaluate projects or plans for CEQA really require like that full accounting of VMT. So we really do need to kind of move to accounting for the full length of trips, even if they pass through the model boundary. So StreetLight data is kind of one of the handful of different data sources that we can take a look at to come up with those trip length estimates, the length of trip estimates that'll impact our VMT numbers. And it's really with the Insight platform, it makes it really easy to kind of access and pull this information out. The next project that I kind of wanted to talk about was really kind of a corridor analysis that we did as part of the Placer Sacramento Gateway Plan. And really this project like took a look at the travel corridor, the I-80 State Route 65 corridor that kind of links southwestern Placer County to downtown Sacramento. And we were really kind of, as part of this project, we ended up doing a Screenline analysis. So we basically drew lines at multiple locations throughout the corridor and then produce summary information on travelers and trips that kind of like pass through those different locations. So really we used the OD analysis from StreetLight again to understand the origins and destinations of trips kind of passing through those Screenline locations on the corridor. And then we were able to use the enhanced trip and traveler attribute information to kind of get an idea not only where the travelers on the corridor were coming from and going to, but also some socio-demographic characteristics and some like trip details as far as trip purpose and trip length for travelers along the corridor. And one of the nice outputs that we were able to generate from those type of different data sets is really like a summary of the travel patterns. For this particular example, it's really just looking at one Screenline location, and it's the westbound I-80 at Madison Avenue location. And what was really kind of surprising about this process and the information that we gained is that travelers passing through this corridor during the AM peak period weren't just coming from Placer County, weren't commuters coming in from Roseville or Rockland. Actually, there was quite a few people that came in from like northern Sacramento County, like Citrus Heights and these other areas, to downtown Sacramento. So that was just kind of like an additional insight that we were able to gain from using this data. And this is like one of the many different kind of figures and analysis that we were able to use to kind of draw conclusions about the characteristics of travel like throughout the corridor. And then that kind of helped to shape the criteria that we use to kind of like propose and evaluate projects as part of that gateway planning effort. So again, it's like a really detailed analysis that wouldn't have been able to be accomplished without the use of StreetLight data. So the third kind of project type that I wanted to just quickly highlight was some turning movement count data that we had to pull for a small project that we were evaluating in the city of Manteca. And what's really nice about StreetLight data and the ability to actually get this turning movement count data is that it allows you to take a look back in time, and we can actually pull turning movement counts during pre-COVID conditions, so before traffic was actually impacted. So you can take a look back in time. The other advantage that we get from this data is really to kind of be able to pull for multiple days, whereas like before, if you had a person going out to actually collect data on a turning movement count, probably most of the time you would just get like a 1-day sample. But this way you can actually pull out for multiple days and multiple time periods. And then the other thing that's kind of nice about the way that the StreetLight, the Insight platform is set up is that you can actually provide individual calibration data for your particular project. So let's say that you had, if you needed turning movement counts at a location, but you weren't able to actually go and get those turning movement amounts collected before COVID, but you did have a nearby like location that you were collecting actual like tube counts and getting that roadway volume information, you could use that roadway volume information as a way to calibrate the turning movement count data. So it makes a nice way to kind of leverage the data that you may have collected before COVID and kind of get this pre-COVID condition at your particular study intersection.